You know I can't be here right now, Esther. Esther Sinclair stood in the back garden of her home. It was more of an expansive stretch of field, rolling hills and forested woodland. The matriarch bore no scars, but she could still feel the pain that was inflicted upon her soul. She could still feel every cut, every laceration, every slice of the serrated blade that had cut through flesh and bone. But still she stood tall, proud, matriarch and empress of her pack. She turned to regard the other werewolf, the Region Alpha. I know, Fenrir, but it was urgent that we speak. Fenrir sighed. He stepped up to the side of Esther. If this is about your daughter, then say no more. You have stated your case, and you know it is against pack law. That daughter of mine is only that in name. I do not claim the runt. But that isn't the issue. Fenrir frowned. Then what, Esther? I find myself losing patience with you. He growled lowly. She's fornicating with a demon. Esther spat out. The words felt like poison on her lips. Fenrir's eyes widened. A demon? Are you sure? Fenrir was almost in a frenzy. This was not good news at all. Yes. I was tortured by that demon for weeks whilst it watched over her like festering mold. Esther retorted. Fenrir took a sharp intake of breath and roughly span Esther round to face him. And you thought not to tell me? You've done some dumb things before, Esther, but this? This takes the fucking cake. I couldn't say anything until the demon was gone from my home. I was under watch by that thing the entire time it was here. She hissed back. A demon will bring down all sorts of trouble. Feral werewolves were eliminated from the world hundreds of years ago by the Seraphim. They only let our strain of lycanthropy exist because we were mostly human. I know the history. Esther snapped. And now your daughter is mating with one. He seethed. He paused. Have they mated yet? Esther shook her head. I have no idea. I don't think so. He hummed in thought. Then we have to prevent that from happening. Esther laughed humorlessly. Do you know how to kill a demon? Because I don't. They left us alone, Esther. They left us because we were too human for them to smite from existence. But this will bring them down on us, and our kind will be sent howling into purgatory. Fenrir ran a hand down his stressed features. If they mate and produce a child, it will mean the end of the werewolf race. Esther knew. The angels took purity just as seriously as werewolves did. The Watchers learned their lesson years ago, when they fell to earth during the time of Noah and fell in love with humans, and sired children with them, creating abominations, Nephilim. If a human and a demon, an angel fallen into hell, were to sire a child, it would create a cambion. You and I both know what will be created if they mate, Esther. We both know what a child of their union will bring. Esther closed her eyes. A racial cleansing, she uttered. Her boys would be purged from the world for simply living, purged because their run of a sister decided to mate with an infernal bile. A hellhound cannot be allowed to see the light of the world as its birth extinguishes ours, Fenrir said, pacing. Then what must be done? Esther asked. Her blood was boiling. It was hot and dangerous as desire ran through her veins. He paused and looked the aging matriarch in the eye. Enid has to die. And Esther rejoiced. Hallelujah. Line break 1 week later. It had been a week since Wednesday had been taken by the angel, and Enid had felt the shattered pieces of heart lay in the dust where they fell, where they dug into her soul. The school staff had been witness to the event. Their knowledge was some of the best on the planet, wise beyond their years. And they whispered to each other in the dimly staffed room and corridors between classes. There was no mistaking it. An angel had showed up at Nevermore. The angel warding was severely outdated and lacking in the school. Most people thought of angels as beautiful and merciful, but the teachers of Nevermore knew differently. Seeing an angel was bad, especially when it came to the outcasts. The host of heaven barely tolerated the outcasts, as they were hybrids of the nameless things that wandered the earth before them, their human characteristics saving them from decimation. The faculty had updated the warding and kept a vigil in the night. The Addams family had been informed of their missing daughter, but the staff were assured of her eventual return, and knowing the reputation of the powerful pair, believed them. It did little to comfort Enid. She went through the motions of her school days. Her heart wasn't in it. She shuffled along from class to class. She had felt like a part of her had been amputated. Her body, heart and soul were not whole. And life could not, and would not have any meaning without the one she had declared to be her mate. Food no longer interested her. K-pop no longer excited her. Blogging and gossip no longer enraptured her. How could she go on? When a werewolf found a mate, their souls would interlock, until the end of all things, until the end of everything. Even through death and beyond the veil. As the glass of the world falls apart, and gives way to the one beneath and above it. Werewolves could die of heartache. Enid had been strong for so long, she had been mateless for years, believing herself to be unworthy, and now she had finally found the one that would be above all, only for her to be ripped away from her, as she could stop it. And now all she wanted to do was wither away and die. If it meant she would be reunited with her Wednesday, whether she may be. All she wanted was to be with the girl she had barely any chance to love. All she wanted was for a chance for the vision she saw to become reality. All she wanted was to love and be loved. Love and be loved. Was that too much to ask? Even color on Enid looked faded, no longer a raging cacophony of color. They fell into a state of dullness, like they were fading as she was. Like a visual representation of her heart. Even her blue eyes had become more gray, lacking their blue spark. Enid was shook out of her thoughts by a knock on the door. She shuffled her way to the door, and opened it to see a small boy, just under 5 foot, with a neatly folded pile of laundry in his arms, that his face was just able to peer over. "Laundry!" he called out cheerfully. Enid opened the door wider to let the small boy in. He was a courier. First-year Nevermore students could volunteer to be school couriers. They would handle things like returning school laundry to their respective rooms. Wood nymphs handled housekeeping. Their magics and minds kept the school both organized and spotless. Couriers did it both for both a bit of extra cash and credit. "Just over there, please." Enid pointed to the foot of the bed. The boy nodded and moved other to carefully set the laundry down in its designated spot. "Nothing like fresh laundry, is there?" the boy asked cheerfully. Enid tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "No, I guess not," Enid replied, sitting down on the bed. Her gaze landed on the empty bed of Wednesday, and she felt her heart jolt, and a new wave of despair washed over her. "She was your roommate, wasn't she, the one that went missing?" the boy asked softly. Enid nodded her head as the younger boy came to sit down next to her. "I know how it feels losing family," he began. "No! She was better than that, she meant so much more to me than family." Enid nearly shouted, but the boy looked unconcerned. Rather, he looked at her with something akin to pity, but there was something else there that she couldn't place. "My name is Adonai," he said. "That's a nice name, ugh, I hate it, please call me Adon," Adon said, rolling his eyes. "Adon it is," Enid said, smiling for the first time she had in a week. Until she looked over at Wednesday's side, she sighed as she felt that slither of happiness slip away from her into the black hole that Wednesday's absence that created in her. "You miss her, don't you?" Enid just tearfully nodded, unable to bear looking at Wednesday's side of the room anymore. The pain was too much. "Do you want to talk about it? I'm a great listener," Adon offered kindly. Enid looked up at him, and she noticed his eyes for the first time, like a veil had been lifted from them. There was a depth there that could not be explained. His eyes were electric leafy green, tinged with a hint of gold in the iris. They looked weathered, tired, like he had seen empires fall and life ages of the earth pass in the blink of an eye. But there was also a sadness there too. And wisdom that would shatter worlds with revelations. "Maybe another time?" Enid offered sadly. Adon sighed, already expecting the answer. He hopped off the bed before making his way back to the door. Though his eyes turned to regard Enid, as his hand grasped the knob of the door. "Everything happens for a reason, Enid, even to the minute detail. Everything has its purpose and everything has a consequence, some that will echo to the end of time. Everything has its wonders, even darkness and silence." Enid blinked, not expecting such philosophical words from someone barely into their teens. Their eyes locked. "She will come back to you, I promise," he said, offering a kind smile to her. His hand turned the knob. "Wait!" she called out, unable to stop herself. His hand stopped mid-turn. His eyes bore into hers, intense and strong. "What are you? Really?" she asked. "A friend," he replied. She huffed. "Nua, you gotta give me something better than that." Enid giggled. "Just know that I'm rooting for you too. I have always rooted for you too," he offered. Enid snorted with humor. He laughed to himself as he turned the door and stepped through, closing it gently behind him. Just outside the school stood the angel that had caused such heartache. Ishmael was pissed. He stood outside the perimeter of Nevermore, his feathers ruffled angrily, as he stared at the transparent barrier in front of him. Angel warding. He thought to himself as he stalked the edge of the school, It was powerful too and up to date. The previous warding provided no problem to the angel as he assaulted Wednesday and Enid in the grounds of the school, nor when he spied on them previously. It would take more power than his own to penetrate this new warding. This would be a problem, but nonetheless he would find a way to enter once more, by force if needed, to eliminate Enid. He knew that Wednesday would not be stuck down in the abyss for long. She would find her way out, even if it took 2 years like last time. He would prevent the genocide that heaven would rain down upon the outcast world if a hellhound was born. He launched himself into the sky, flew back through cloud and sky, intent on returning back to the celestial city. Enid was safe from him. For now. Line break. Thing sat perched on Wednesday's shoulder as she stared out at the landscape before her. You call this a shortcut? Wednesday deadpanned. Thing lifted his fingers in the form of a shrug. Before her stood a desolate cavern, lined with ruins and battlements. A river flowed here, bioluminescent lichen grew along the banks, bathing them in a golden-green glow. The water sparkled as the light refracted from the rushing waters. What is this place? She asked, her own knowledge lacking. Thing began to sign. It used to belong to the Old Ones. It was their kingdom under the earth. It was the conduit that led to all realms until they were sealed off. Wednesday nodded. It's beautiful, she said sincerely. It really was. The ruins of the old kingdom stood as a testament to great masonry, command of stone and magics. A monument to the once great Old Ones. What happened to them? She asked. No one really knows, although some of them escaped to Earth and intermixed with humans, creating the hybrids you see today. Were they angels? Wednesday asked as they walked alongside the slow-flowing river. No, just something from before. No one knows. Thing signed with a shrug. Wednesday climbed over stone ruins and old stone, observing the plant life that grew here. She looked up at the ceiling to see thousands of stars engraved into the ceiling, twinkling dots in an otherwise darkness-enveloped ceiling. But as they traveled, she noticed that the water began to rush faster and faster, and the lichen and plant life grew wilder and wilder. Vines snaked across the floor, and butterflies had illuminant yellow wings, looking like sparks in the air. Enid would love this. Thinking of the blonde girl set her heart aflame. And the pining her heart felt threatened to burst from her chest. They had only been separated a week. Even for a being that was eternal like her, it really had felt like forever, but she pushed on because she needed to get back to her, to protect her, to love her, to cherish her. Ishmael would come for her, that much she knew. Although why was a reason that still eluded her. As they came to a precipice, Wednesday gazed in wonderment as the water didn't rush down but up. Gravity didn't seem to be a fixed law here, and it was being abused. Even without Thing's direction, she could sense it. This was conduit to the world above, to Earth. To Enid. Wednesday was never much one for blind faith, but here she let her foot rise, and she let her body fall forwards over the cliff edge, until she was forced upwards, away from the abyss, the kingdom of the Old Ones, and towards her, toward Enid. Wednesday coughed water out from her lungs, her human-made body now mortal once more. She gasped in heaps of oxygen as Thing shook the water from himself like that of a dog before scampering up her shoulder. Her chest heaved as she lay flat on the grass, the waterfall behind her throwing down thousands of liters of water a second. She felt the crisp air of the night tickle at her wet skin. She could not contain her mirth as she realized she was back. She's waiting for you, you know, a voice said. Wednesday sprang to her feet, dagger around her fingers as she gazed at the stranger. He looked to be about 12, wearing a Nevermore uniform, but it looked dull, worn with age, weathered by trial and tribulation. His eyes, a bright leafy green, but even to her he looked like an old soul in a young boy's body. Her eyes narrowed in suspicion. Who are you? She demanded, wielding her dagger in front of herself. A friend, the stranger said. I have no friends, Wednesday said. Only enemies and people to be used. The stranger chuckled. Really? Is that how you regard the wolf? Enid? The stranger dared to venture. Wednesday's eyes dangerously narrowed. What did you do to her? The stranger held up his hands in surrender. Nothing, Wednesday, I promise. I don't break my promises or make them lightly. His eyes twinkled. You never told me your name, she hissed. The stranger chuckled. Call me Adon, he said cheerfully with a mock bow. How did you know I would be here? His grin widened. Now that is the $1,000,000 question, isn't it? He bent down and picked up a smooth stone, turning it over in his hands. I know things, he said simply as he examined the stone like it was the most fascinating thing in the world. I know what was, what is to come, and what will never be and everything that could have been. You're a seer?" she asked, her dagger lowering slightly. "Of sorts," he said. "Do you always speak cryptically?" Adon laughed, the smile lit up his face and tired eyes. "Only when it really matters," he said. Wednesday growled lowly. "If you have nothing to offer me, then get out of my way," Wednesday said, making to move past him. He held out an arm and caught her, grounding her to a halt, his strength enough to halt the demon in her tracks. "I'm here to take you back to her, Wednesday." Her eyes narrowed again. "I thought you said you were a seer?" He chuckled, that, amongst other things. She grew more and more suspicious the longer she talked to this boy. He had knowledge, strength, and wisdom. She could see it in his eyes. This boy had seen things over such a period of time. "I can see in your eyes you don't believe me. That is okay. There are not many who do. But I always speak the truth, Wednesday, if even I choose to play fast and loose and omit a few details." Her eyes met his. He smiled at her. It was warm, kind, and compassionate. He chuckled again. "But that's what makes life great, doesn't it? The not knowing, the wonder, the exploration, the search for knowledge, the search for the meaning of it all. Most people don't realize the meaning of life is always right in front of them." Wednesday's curiosity was high, and she couldn't stop herself asking the ultimate question that scholars, philosophers, and religious leaders had been trying to answer since the dawn of all things. "And what would that be?" His eyes twinkled. "To be happy," he said simply. Wednesday knew this boy believed in everything he had just said, but for it to be so simple took her breath away. She thought about what made her happy. It used to be torture, it used to be the pain she could inflict in those that deserved it. But now, to be happy was to be with Enid. It would always be Enid. Forever. Wednesday gulped as Adon watched her with interest. She went through her own revelation at his words, and he felt joy as she found her answer, like universe would rejoice with them in this moment. "Before I take you back, Wednesday, there is one more truth, no omissions, no lies, just God's honest truth, that I wish to tell you. Do you want to hear it?" Wednesday gazed down at Adon and nodded her head. Adon's smile grew wider with merriment as he drew closer to her and lay a hand on her shoulder and leaned up to whisper into her ear. "I always intended for you to fall in love with the moon that shines like the sun. It's what you were named for and after." He whispered in her ear. Wednesday's whole being shook, as his power washed through her. Understanding passed between them, as she began to fade, her body being transported back. Their eyes met, his filled with compassion and guilt. His words had left her completely and utterly devastated. She finally understood. "Wait, F.A. Her words were cut short as her body vanished in a blip of light, leaving Adon standing alone by the waterfall, the conduit to the kingdom of the Old Ones, alone, as he always had been.